Well, hello. This is Mike from Music City again, and we're back with another episode of what we're calling Ranking Records. We've previously done the catalogs of Elvis Costello and Bruce Springsteen, and here today we're switching to a band, and one of my favorite all-time bands, and that's the band called Squeeze. Squeeze, as I'm sure if you're watching this, you probably have some familiarity with them. Squeeze is pretty much the work of singers-songwriters Chris Difford and Glenn Tilbrook. Through the years, they've gone through many different incarnations of bands. We'll discuss that a little bit along the way. Both Difford and Tilbrook have done some solo work, which we'll leave for another time. And one of the other things we're going to skip over is a record they did together called Difford and Tilbrook, which you could call a Squeeze record, but we'll keep strict to the rules. And again, we're skipping compilations and live albums. But it does make me want to point out, though, that there are a lot of really good Squeeze B-sides that have come out on various different greatest hits collections, and there was a box set way back when. And I really recommend, if you are really want to discover the work of this band, that you go and dig into them. And just a little sidebar before we start, one thing that I really highly recommend, if you can find it, is this book called Squeeze, Song by Song. There's a couple of books in this series, one great one on Ian Dury. It's really hard to find, but it's really fabulous. The author's name is Jim Drury, and he worked with both Glenn and Chris to come through and basically go through, like I say, song by song. You'll just learn a lot of fascinating things about the band. And then one other quick sidebar, get it out of the way. Another fantastic read is Chris Difford's biography called Some Fantastic Place. You know, this came out last year or 2 years ago when we also had great bios by Elvis Costello and Bruce Springsteen, the first two subjects, coincidentally, of Rankin' Records. And I really thought out of the three, this was the best. It was just so well written. You really learn to just like and love Chris Difford as a person. It's very fascinating, interesting. You learn things you never knew before. Like, how many of us knew that Chris Difford was once Brian Ferry's manager? You know, Brian Ferry of Roxy Music fame. So just a lot of really fascinating stuff in here as well. I highly recommend this. So let's get to the records. Now, we're gonna start off with a record as the worst, and again, Squeeze is such a great band that the worst obviously is better than a lot of other work by other artists. But on this first one, I called one of my friends who, like me, is a bigger Squeeze fan, and I said, okay, I'll give you $5 for every song you can name off of Squeeze's record Domino. He couldn't think of one. And when I looked back over the track list of this record, I just realized how at the time gave this record a few listens and just kind of put it aside and completely forgot about it. And probably deserves a listen again, but for those reasons there, we're going to put it at the bottom. This came out in '98, and they released it on their own label, Quixotic Records, so the lack of any major label support certainly had maybe something to do with this being such a quiet, unlistened to record, and didn't get any radio play. The tour at the time, if I recall, Chris Difford had taken a sabbatical from the band, so Glenn was out with a bunch of other musicians calling themselves Squeeze. So again, this record never got a chance. That's why one of the reasons why it's there at the bottom. Next, we're gonna go. Well, I didn't even count to see how many we had here. We've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 Squeeze records. So in at lucky number 13 is their debut album called Squeeze. Actually called UK Squeeze. There were some conflicts with some bands with the same name, so for a short time here, and I believe in Australia, they were known as UK Squeeze. I think in Australia they still are called UK Squeeze. But, strangely enough, this record was produced by John Cale from the Velvet Underground, which at the time the band thought was a fabulous thing. They were such big fans of the Velvet Underground, but, Cale must have thought he was producing the Sex Pistols or something, because this record, for the most part, doesn't sound anything like the Squeeze we know or love. It does include one of their better-known songs, one of their greatest songs of all time, Take Me, I'm Yours, and Cale didn't produce it. They went back after the record was done to add that to it, to give it some, give the record some commercial, and they did that. coming up with a big hit and a song that is one of their most popular songs today. But number 13 is UK Squeeze. Number 12 and number 11 we're going to kind of lump together. We've had this discussion on the previous ones that it's hard for a band to get their later work to just have the significance of their older catalog, and I think part of that is the listeners. But at number 12, the most recent record, it's called The Knowledge. Good songs on it. It's not a horrible record or anything. It just winds up, this is where it winds up. And they did do this on some of these songs on the last tour. They sounded great. But we're gonna put that as number 12. And number 11, the record just before that, Cradle to the Grave, which I liked much better than The Knowledge. The title track was a great song. One of the things I really liked about this record, there were 4 bonus tracks that you got on iTunes of cover versions that I really recommend you check out. They did Harper Valley, PTA, what's the Kinks song, Strange Effect, I believe it's called. Great version there. So again, number 11, Cradle to Grave. Number 10. Now we're really getting into stuff that I would call just almost from here on out. Every album is pretty darn good. Number 10 is Ridiculous. Some really classic squeeze cuts on here, like Electric Trains, This Summer. Good live shows around this time too. So great record. Number 9, Cozy Van Tutti Frutti. We didn't talk too much about the makeup of the band, but the original keyboard player in Squeeze was Jules Holland, who's probably obviously the most famous member of the band today, since he became a big TV star, doing later with Jude Holland's live music show in England on the BBC. But he had left the band, came back for this record. This record did fairly well. Got the band some good attention. It's got some great songs on here. Things like King George Street, Hits of the Year. Very, very, very delightful record, and it was good to see Jules come back to the band. I keep losing my track of my count. We're up to number 8, Babylon and On. A good record, probably one of their biggest records here in America. Has quite a few hits on it. Hourglass, 853 and 5937. Those were pretty popular radio songs in America, and they're still featured in the live show. Little sidebar here. It's kind of funny. I would say that the most popular Squeeze album in America would be the Greatest Hits records, 45 and under. Because I think it came at a time where people were starting to notice Squeeze, and it sort of put everything into perspective and made for a nice record, for people to discover the band with. Number 7 is a real sleeper, I think, in the Squeeze catalog, a record that doesn't get the attention it deserves, and that's Frank. Man, some really, really good stuff on here. She Doesn't Have to Shave. One of Glenn's most beautiful songs. A great song to hear him do in his solo sets. I love the quirky Melody Motel, the kind of macabre psychopath in that song. Just a great record. One of Chris Difford's best songs on here. Chris, not the singer that Glenn is, but he has his own style, and when he sings a song, he makes it his own, and it's very delightful. Slaughtered, Guttered, and Heartbroken. Sidebar time. One thing I'd like to say, Glenn Tilbrook, by far, pound for pound, if you want to judge a rock and roller, an artist on the combined talents of singing and guitar playing, there's no one like Glenn Tilbrook. What a beautiful singer, what a great voice, and what a fantastic guitar player. So he gets my vote if you were to combine those two talents together as to who would be number 1. Number 6, another big album for the band, probably because it came off the heels of their biggest album ever, and that's Sweets for a Stranger. Some really good songs in here, some big songs for the band. Black Coffee in Bed, beautiful song that Frank Sinatra should have sung, When the Hangover Strikes. Sweets from a Stranger, a great record. And this is, if I stand correctly, for the Sweets for a Stranger record, the keyboard player was Don Snow, who was with a band that's one of my all-time favorite bands that I think you should check out. And we may do something later on about some of these obscure, not obscure is too strong a word, but some of these lesser-known bands that I really love, called Los Sinceros. Number 5 may surprise you a little bit, but this is a record I think that didn't get the attention it deserves. And I think, in my opinion, it features one of Squeeze's greatest all-time songs, and that's the title track to this one, called Some Fantastic Place. Just a beautiful, tender love song about a dear friend of the band who died way too young. We've also got stuff on here like the Third Rail. Lovin' You Tonight was sung by the great Paul Carrack, who used to be with the band Ace. You may have heard the song How Long, and we're going to talk about Paul Carrack when he joined the band in a few releases ahead from here. But again, Some Fantastic Place, a great record. Number 4, and again, I keep talking about surprises. This may be a surprise to you, but I really do think, and this is the real sleeper in the Squeeze catalog, is the record Play. What a fantastic record. They worked with producer Tony Berg here, recorded it out in California. One of my all-time favorite Squeeze songs is on here, Wicked and Cruel, which they did a fantastic, very almost prog rock version of on the most recent tour. It's the hit off the record was Sunday Street, which is a great song. A little sidebar, I went to see in California, I guess it was 3 years ago, when Glenn and Chris did the tour where they toured acoustically and did a Q&A session. And I got to ask a question. I was sitting in the front row, and I asked the first question, and I said, boy, you've got an underrated record in your catalog, Play. Tell us something about it. And they both spoke very fondly of the album, and I wasn't aware at the time when I was asking the question that they did record it right there in California. So I think they were pleased to hear about I think the respect that not only myself, a lot of fans have for that record that really didn't get them the attention it deserved. Number 3, this is the second album, Cool for Cats. I think the record, no doubt, this is the record that really put the band on the map, and it got them a slew of hits in the UK, got them attention here in the US. It's where I jumped in on the band. I remember buying this record at the famous J&R Music World in Lower Manhattan that sadly isn't there anymore. Bought it on vinyl. And, man, I mean, just the songs on here. I mean, we got Slap and Tickle, Goodbye Girl, the title track, of course, one of Chris Difford's greatest vocals. But it also has, and I don't want to exaggerate too much, but I do have somewhere a list of my top 10 favorite all-time songs, and one of them is on here, and it's just an absolute perfect song, and one that I just can never hear enough, and that's Up the Junction. What a beautifully written song. It gets me every time. Number 2, and I think number 1 and number 2 are gonna show up in a lot of people's lists, but I think they'll be flipped back and forth how people view them. But for me, number 2 is the fabulous East Side Story. You may or may not be aware that the Squeeze's original intention behind this record were to have be a double record with each side produced by a different person, and the 4 producers that they had selected were Dave Edmunds, Elvis Costello, Nick Lowe, and Paul McCartney. Well, somehow that didn't seem to work, and what they wound up doing was Elvis Costello produced this record alongside Roger Bacarian, who had worked a lot with Elvis in the past and a lot of other great artists. And I mean, just come on, just a fantastic record, and features probably their biggest hit in America, which was Tempted, sung at the time by Paul Carrack, who had joined the band on keyboards for this record. Elvis is credited for creating the arrangement that made this such a great hit. Just kind of looking, I mean, gosh, Label with Love, Piccadilly, just a really, really great record that really solidly put this band on the map. Number 1, if you're a Squeeze fan, you probably know what it's going to be, and I'm going to jump to a vinyl version of it, and that's Argy Bargy, by far my favorite Squeeze album. My little personal story on this is kind of interesting. I just moved to Texas, and my wife and I took a day trip to Austin and walked into a record store, and unsurprising to us, there was Squeeze doing a record signing. And I was just so blessed to get it signed by everybody, right, in their respective boxes. And Jules even drew a little car there. And, you know, we got Glenn and Chris, the original bass player and drummer, John Bentley, and Gilson Lavis. So, again, gosh, I mean, pulling muscles for Michelle, another nail in my heart. If I Didn't Love You. I mean, just a great record. You know, really made me a big fan of the band, and I credit my wife a lot, who, when we got home, she couldn't stop playing this record to really encourage me to be the Squeeze fan that I became. So again, I'm excited. Squeeze will be touring. They're headlining. Excuse me. They're opening for headliners Hall and Oates at a few bigger venues, and also they're going to be doing some smaller shows on their own. I'm going to get to see them here in Nashville at the Ryman Auditorium, and also I'm going to take a trip up to Louisville to see them at the Palace Theater. Very much looking forward to that. Although the band is a lot of different players today, but they've been together for some time now. Certainly sound great. I've seen a lot of live videos recently of the last tour, which didn't come close to me, unfortunately. But again, looking forward to those shows. So again, thanks for listening. If you like what we're doing, please subscribe. I look forward to your comments and your choices, and what you might have to say about my selections, and give me suggestions as to future artists you'd like to see. But thanks for spending some time with us today.